Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be another technical video tonight. I did this last year on my John Deere 5020 in between pulls. I took a set of injectors out of my Dodge 5.9 Cummins truck and swapped injector tips over. The reason I did that is because I knew the injector tips in the Dodge had already been honed out like 20 something odd years ago when I was truck pulling all the time. We took those tips out, I measured them all up compared to my John Deere injectors in my 619 engine, and the tips actually happen to be close to the same. There is a difference for the Bosch injectors. There's a 7mm and a 9mm tip, but you can actually get a sleeve washer that will adapt a 7mm tip into a 9mm head. You look up injector sleeve adapters for Bosch on eBay and you'll see what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, I was able to take the injectors out of my 12 valve 5.9 Cummins, take the tips, disassemble the injector and take the tips out, put those into a new set of John Deere injectors that I'd bought from somewhere up north that were bone stock, and put those in my tractor. The spray patterns were close. I know for some of you injector experts you're going to holler spray pattern. The spray pattern angle was close for truck pulling, tractor pulling, going down the track 300 feet at a time. If it's spraying against the walls, if it was that bad off, it's probably not going to hurt for that short amount of time, trying to get as much fuel as you can. But the pattern on the ones that I swapped out were actually fairly close. And when I say pattern, I'm talking about the angle that the fuel comes out of the injector tip. I mean, if you've got your injector tip, fuel can come out at this angle, it can come out this angle. The catch is, if your injector tip, the pattern is fanned out too much, it'll actually spray against the cylinder wall instead of into the pre-combustion bowl in the piston, which will wash down your cylinder liners, cause premature wear, get fuel down in your oil, and it makes for bad news. Now, can I farm with my 5020 with those injectors probably not being right? No, it'd end up washing it down, probably hurting it. But it was a good learning experience, and I actually bought an injector tester. You can buy an injector pop tester off of eBay or Amazon for like 90 bucks. It leaks a little bit, but for what it is actually worth the money. To be able to tear down a set of injectors in your basement, clean them up, put them back together, and then pop test them and shim them up until you get them where they need to be. It's pretty convenient. I mean, I'm in my little bitty basement garage room here rebuilding injectors, and I can do that based off our wonderful Chinese friends who are building stuff for dirt cheap nowadays. I'm a buy American kind of guy, but it's hard to pass up an injector pop tester for 90 bucks. But nonetheless, we did that last year. Took a set of 5.9 injectors. You can look those up online, see what a 5.9 injector looks like. Took 5.9 injectors and built a set for the Dodge to put back in the Dodge, since I put the pull-in injectors in my 5020, and then built a set for the 5020. Pop tested both sets. The Dodge injectors I bought years ago from Enterprise Engine Performance, Dave and Loretta Mitchell. I think Dave has passed on since then. But I have no specs on them. They could be 5x18s, 5x20s, 5x25s, I don't know. All I know is they push out a lot of fuel when I had them on the injector pop tester. The reason I know that is because I took the factory injector, which was shimmed up for factory injector pressure, cracking pressure. Cracking pressure on them was from like 26 to 3,000 psi. You can look the spec up. The spec's actually printed on the side of the injector. It's labeled in bars. You have to convert it over to psi. I took those big nozzles in my John Deere injectors, put those big tips in the John Deere injectors. The John Deere injectors were still shimmed for a factory nozzle, and when I went to pop test them, fuel just squirted out in a straight stream instead of vaporizing. That's how big the nozzle tip was. The theory there is, when I looked at those injector bodies, they were matched, and I checked one of the pulling injectors before I ever took it apart. The pulling injectors out of my Dodge were popping at 5,200 psi, which I thought was astronomical. Well, then I got to thinking about it. When you put that big of an orifice in an injector, 28 or 3,600 psi will no longer produce enough pressure to make it vaporize when it comes out. So they in turn shim up the cracking pressure on those injectors god awful high, 5,200 psi in the case of those. That way, by the time that injector finally pops, the plunger and barrel in your injection pump has built up so much pressure that it forces out there and it vaporizes even through that big orifice on that injector tip. So when you go and start putting bigger injector tips in injectors, you've got to make sure that you've got a pop tester. That way you can pop test your injectors, set that cracking pressure up on your injector to make sure that you're still getting a vaporized fuel mixture coming out of those injectors and not just a straight string. Because if you get a straight string, you're up the creek and you're in for bad news in a short amount of time. Now, a new project that I have got that I have not shown you all yet, because I've only made one video this year. We bought a Belarus. Some people call it Belarus, but it's Belarus over in Minsk, over there near Ukraine and Russia, where they're having a war right now. It's the tractors, when you go to the auction, they're dirt cheap. Nobody wants to buy them, and they go for $300, $400, $500 for a rough-looking tractor. I found a Belarus back in December that was actually a really good-looking tractor, and it's an MTZ-80, 80 horsepower tractor, I believe, 4-cylinder, 4.7 liter. Got the tractor for dirt cheap. I mean, less than the grand. A ways less than the grand. Almost cost more to have it hauled home. Got the tractor to the garage, got some fuel going to it, and then fired up. The sole purpose of this little tractor is to make a 6,000-7,000 pound weight class tractor. If I can get the weight cut down on it some, which I'm already working on. The tractor's already split in two. The clutch disc is right here. The pressure plate and flywheel are right here in the floor. I probably should have done a video on that because I'm building my own pulling pressure plate this time. Got some springs coming for that. But got the injectors out of the tractor because I need to get more fuel to it. These originals, I think, are a 4-hole design and like 0.013 small injector. The newer injectors were a 5-hole design. And what I came up with was, it's an FD22 injector, is the model number on it. I bought a brand new set of injector tips. They are identical to a Bosch DLLA style. And if you look up Bosch DLLA, you'll see what the injector tip looks like. This, if the light's not shining too bright on it, is the Belarus injector tip. Got a set of these for like 65 bucks delivered. I was online watching Dynamite Diesel Performance out in, where are they located at? Idaho, Utah. I've thrown my paper away. Dynamite Diesel Performance, you can look them up. Hayden, Idaho. Dynamite Diesel Products, located in Hayden, Idaho. Called Dynamite Diesel because if I looked on their website and it showed that they had an injector hone service. And then online it said, you send us your injector or your injector tip and we'll run it through our fluid hone to any size you want. So I sent a brand new set of tips out to Dynamite Diesel. Now they originally said they would flow them out to whatever I wanted to, right to the point that it would trash them if I wanted, because I told them I wanted it all out, balls to the wall, as big as I could get. Well, they kind of backed off of that after I sent them the injectors out there, and they said they flowed these out to like 10 more liters per minute. I don't really know where they were at before versus where they're at now, so I'm kind of shooting in the dark here, but they have been honed out. So what we're going to do this evening, I've got all 4 of my injectors down and out. They're right here on the table in front of me. We're going to take these injectors apart, and I'm going to walk through the process of one of these and show you how I'm going to install the injector tips in it, and then try and hook it back up to my pop tester, and we'll pop test these things and try and get the pressure. We'll check the spray pattern in them. I pop test them inside of a water bottle. We'll check and see what the spray pattern is. And these injectors are actually a lot simpler than the Bosch injector I built last year, because these injectors actually have an adjusting nut with a adjusting screw with a jam nut that you can actually just turn that screw in to increase your pop pressure instead of having to take it all back apart every time like the Dodge injectors were and that Cummins, and add shims. So this is our injector. To save time on screen, I already went through and tore this one completely apart, and parts of it were really tight. These injectors, this is where the return line is on the fuel for these Belarus, and like I said, this is called an FD22 injector. I've seen some Ford tractors have some of these. Actually, I've seen a lot of older tractors run an injector style like this. So this is your return housing. It's got a copper washer under it, and there's just a banjo bolt screw that your return line runs through on all these. So when I tear these apart, we'll come through here, Like I said, I've already done the hard part of getting these all cracked loose. We'll take this housing off, and when you get that housing off, it's just a hollow housing with a copper washer here. We'll lay that over here. Now once you get down to that, this is your adjusting screw. Here's a jam nut and an adjusting screw. You use this to set your cracking pressure on this injector nozzle. There's a spring under this, and the tighter you crank down on that spring, it keeps that little nozzle, little piston in here down until your pressure rises up high enough to overcome the spring, and then it lets the fuel flow down through your injector tip. Now I took this off last, so we'll go ahead and go up here. When you're taking the 7 injectors apart, these are usually carboned over, so check and look for these, because you can actually take these injector copper seals, and I'm sure some of you will recommend against it, but in a pinch you can take these seals, because this is what I'm doing with this tractor, because this is a budget build. Take these, take you a little bitty blowtorch, and heat these seals up cherry red. This copper washer, heat it up cherry red and anneal it, and then let it cool back off. And then when you get ready to go, clean the whole lot down on your cylinder head, put this right back on, and torque it right back down. But we've got the return housing off. Take your sealing washer off, don't lose it, and then chuck this injector up in a vise and take your tip nut retainer and break it loose. Once you break it loose, just unscrew it off. It's fine threads. Everything is normal rotation on the threads. So once you get that housing off, easily set it off, and that will reveal your injector nozzle. We'll set that to the side. When you take your injector nozzle off, on these injectors, there's no more loose parts right here. You will find that these pins right here can be loose sometimes. These two are not. So what you've got once you take this end off on these Belarus, these FD22 nozzles, is just your injector tip with the needle down in it. And there's your needle that moves up and down. So take this injector tip. This is our old 4-hole 13 injector tip. We'll put it over here, put everything in the same line. You take it apart so you know how it goes together. Now back up here, this screw, this adjusting screw on these injectors will not back out. To take it out, you have to take this injector body apart right here, which was extremely tight a while ago. Once you take that out, you can turn this all the way in. I'm not going to take it all the way out. I'm just going to take the body apart and clean up what's inside of it. Now, like I said, I like to never got this broke loose a while ago. I had to actually turn it upside down in the vise and then take the injector body with a pipe wrench and break it loose. So once you do that, take this body loose right here from this spring housing. Hold it up. Now your cracking pressure adjustment screw is loose. Set it up here in the same order it comes loose. Then here is your cracking spring. Here's your cracking pressure spring, your injector spring that controls your cracking pressure based on how much you adjust it. I will say this one, it does not appear to be any different, but if you're taking an injector apart that you've never done before, just like I'm doing here, always remember the orientation things come out. They could be a very minute difference in these springs. It could be a beehive type spring. It could have a different measurement on one end than it does the other. Make sure you take it apart and lay it out the same way that you got it apart. So once you get your spring out, turn your injector up. Then comes your little piston needle that's inside of it that rides on that spring. Now what this little outfit does is it makes contact with that little needle inside of your injector tube. So when your pressure comes down through here, that pressure, once it gets so high, pushes that needle up against this little piston, which compresses the spring and lets that fuel flow through there to open that injector up. Now let's talk about performance for a minute. If you look online at Scheid Diesel, they talk about dual drilled injectors. Now I'm assuming that they are meaning dual drilled possibly in the tip and in the injector body. I'm going to assume that if they're saying dual drilled, where these right here only have one fuel port right here, that they're finding some way or another they're going to take and billet bodies and drilling 2 ports. If I am wrong on this, please correct me. because I would like to know. Of course, I don't have the means to dual drill in an injector here. I like to do everything myself, but there's limitations to everything. But you can see right here in these holes line up, the pins, and that fuel port goes through there. This injector tip seals to this injector body just based on a machine surface. Something I'm going to do on this injector. My Dodge injectors, I noticed, this injector right here, when you take this, and I'm going to take it loose here, I may not do it on camera, but this has a screen under it. You take this fitting out, the fuel injection line fitting, it's supposed to have a screen under it. I'm taking that out to get rid of that restriction inside. My Dodge injectors, where I tore them apart, a factory 5.9 Cummins injector has a baffle, a little 3-hole baffle right down inside of the injector line hole. The injectors I had, those baffles have been removed to allow more fuel to flow through there with less restriction. So we're going to take the screens out of these, we're going to put our bigger tips back in them, we're going to clean all this up before we do that, put them together, and then we're going to pop test one of them on the injector pop tester, and we're going to see if we can get one to spray with a good pattern. I just got the fitting out of this one, and it was extremely tight. I want to show you this. Here it is. Here's a little brass screen right inside of that injector right there. That it is porous enough that it probably would not affect performance, but if you're running trash through an injection pump and it's already made it to the injector, then you've already got big problems anyway, and there's probably enough fine metal that's going to escape through this that you have to take your injectors out and clean them anyway. Not really sure what the thought on this is. It's a little bit overkill, but it is what it is. But we're going to take these screens out, and then we will put these injectors back together, and I'll bring you along for that too. I'll go outside and wash all these up right quick and bring them back in, and we'll try and start assembling one injector tonight and possibly pop testing one. I did manage to get one injector washed up. I got all of them brushed down and got one brushed up. We're going to go ahead and start putting this back together, and I'm going to focus the camera back down here on the vise. Alright, put our injector body in the vise. Make sure your machine surface where your pins are at for your tip is good and clean. I've got my enlarged tips, and I did just go out there and spray some ether through these to make sure all the honing fluid was out of them, and they do seem to spray quite large, so maybe we do have a little bit of extra fuel going to it. Line this up based on our pins and our fuel port. Sets in. Take our injector nut. There's one little piece left. When you get these injector nuts though, make sure you take a pick and turn them over and get down inside, because carbon will work up in between the tip and the nut, and it'll cake up on the inside at the bottom of the tip and this ring around here. I put everything in the wire brush on the bench grinder and then scrape out the corners down inside here where it seats to get as much carbon as I can out of it. And then I ether it all off or brake clean. So then we'll take this and screw it down with our tip. To get it seated. I'll go back and torque these later. Now that the injector tip is seated and put in place, we will take the needle. And these injectors have had some water down through them because you can see the rust in places. Let's make sure that's seated properly. Yeah. Okay, make sure it falls over top of that needle on that injector tip. Tighten it down a little bit. So there is the plunger, the piston. Here's our spring. And here's our adjustment housing. Go ahead and run this down. And I think this is zero stop against the threads. So let's lock it down against the housing here. Then we will take, that was, no, that wasn't a 17. We had to bust that loose in the tighten that as tight as you can get it, because God knows it was as tight as you could probably get it when I took it apart. So there's that. We'll leave the cap. I'm going to take these copper washers that hold the return housing. I will run them in a torch to soften them up again, and then I will put them back on. Our fitting is cleaned up now, and the screen is gone, and that's pretty much it. Alright, so here is our injector tester, and I saw on the back VEVOR, V-E-V-O-R, a VEVOR injector tester. You can sit there and you'll watch as long as this thing works tonight. You'll crank this thing up so far and the pressure will get so high, and all of a sudden it'll trip back down. And that is this pressure overcoming the spring in here. I've turned these adjusters in 5 turns, so I have no idea what the pressure is going to be. Here we go. So they're braking right at 2600, which is actually spec. And the spray pattern is actually pretty good. Back this nut on off and see if we can get a finer. The finer the atomization on your injector, the more fuel you will burn. The finer the fuel is, the easier it is to ignite. The smaller the fuel particle is, the easier it is to ignite. 31. That seems to be making more of a vapor inside the can. 3100. The injector body, injector housing, all the parts that can be cleaned, I put them in a wire wheel. Took brake cleaner, ether, cleaned them up, and then come through here. We took the screens out of the injector to help free up some flow. We put our bigger injector tips in, and now we have took our $80–90 injector pop tester and rebuilt an injector in the basement below my kitchen that we're going to put down in this little Belarus. That's it for me tonight, folks. I appreciate you all coming along. If you like the content, take a moment, hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment, give us a like, and share our videos. This is we do tech videos, we do tractor show and tractor pull videos, a little bit of everything here, but we're all homegrown and we're all DIY. And there's a lot of DIY folks out there that want to do this same stuff, but it's hard to find information on it, like I said in my pump video. So I'm just taking it upon myself to dig in, do a bunch of reading, and figure it out as I go by watching inside and see how stuff operates. But again, thanks for coming along. You all have a good night, and I'll see you next time.